Hey there YouTube lovers, my name is BB8 and today we are going to review Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. I did take my time with this game. That's probably why my review video is like 2 months after the game's launch. Because don't forget, I didn't get the game at launch. I got it on Christmas morning. And I did end up taking my time with the game. Because I did end up getting Sonic Frontiers as well. Which, hopefully by the time the month wraps up, I will get the review video for Sonic Frontiers out. And without further ado, let's get into the review. And just as a quick reminder before we get into the video, this review video does contain spoilers for Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. So if you've not played Scarlet and Violet yet, I do advise that you come back to this video after you've played the game. Because I'm not taking responsibility if the game gets spoiled for you. So watch this review video at your own risk. And without further ado, for real this time, let's get into the review, shall we? For the story, I do think they did take an interesting move with the story this time. Because unlike past Pokemon games, Scarlet and Violet actually lets you do the story in any order that you please, giving us 3 different storylines to choose from: Victory Road, The Path of Legends, and Starfall Street. Victory Road is where you go around Paldea fighting the gym leaders and stuff. Like, I thought the gym leaders this time were fine. I just think compared to the likes of Sword and Shield's gym leaders, I thought Sword and Shield definitely had better gym leaders, but I thought this game's electric type gym leader, Lono or Iono, I know quite a few people may end up hating her, but I thought she's actually a fine character. I thought Iono or Lono, however it's pronounced, actually had personality. The only thing I was disappointed with this time is there was no fire gym. But don't forget, there was a Team Star boss who was fire type, so that may have been reasonable not to include a fire type gym leader this time, which I could be okay with. But I can say the only bummer of Victory Road was I hated the Elite Four this time around, so only because I thought the members of the Elite Four did lack personality a bit, and I did find their designs a bit boring. And I do think if I was to rank every Elite Four in the Pokemon franchise, I definitely think Scarlet and Violet, for me, is at the bottom. And the champion of Paldea, aka Geeta, I thought the champion was just so awful this time around, because the only reason I say that Geeta is an awful champion is because I feel like Geeta is too easy. Because I managed to beat her first try when I ran through the Elite Four and the champion. And I just felt like this Elite Four and the champion was a bit too easy, and I feel like it could have had a bit of difficulty in it. So overall, I thought the Victory Road was fine. It was just, this Elite Four was terrible. For the Path of Legends, the Path of Legends path is where you go around the Paldea region defeating different Titan Pokemon. I do think this is like a creative way to bring in some like new bosses into the Pokemon franchise and stuff. Like, I do like the way they did make like Eternatus in Sword and Shield this full-on boss. But having 5 different Pokemon be bosses, each of them being new Pokemon. Legends Arceus did this element, and I'm glad they did bring it back with Scarlet and Violet, but not with the same twist though, because unlike Legends Arceus, where you can throw bombs at the Pokemon to like calm it down, Scarlet and Violet doesn't really do that. And every time you beat one of the Titans, Koraidon or Miraidon would get a new ability. In my case, Miraidon, because I picked Pokemon Violet, but it is reasonable why Koraidon or Miraidon doesn't have all the abilities at the beginning of the game. Because I just think if you had all the abilities that the legendaries had at like the beginning, I just think that would just be a bit too easy. And I do think adding a bit more difficulty to it, I do think it was reasonable having to beat the Titans to unlock the new abilities that Koraidon or Miraidon have. And for the final of the 3 paths you can take in the game, we have Starfall Street. I thought Starfall Street, was a new take on an evil team. Because unlike past evil teams, where you just do the whole thing in like order and stuff, Team Star, aka Scarlet and Violet's evil team, has multiple team bases you can visit, having 5 bosses. I think my favourite in here is Mela, being the fire type boss. But when you defeat all 5 of them, you can unlock some new TMs to use when beating each one. And I do like the way how they do like a TM machine this time around, like collecting different parts from like your Pokemon to craft like new TMs and stuff. I didn't mind that. Like, I'm fine that they did that. But back to the Starfall Street story arc. I think the plot twist, I just think the plot twist was alright. Although the plot twist with Penny being Cassiopeia, aka the Team Star leader, I just think, really, although I didn't see the plot twist coming when I first played the game, but I would see this being a bit predictable for other players when they go through the game. And I do think after you've beaten all 3, you actually get to go on a journey inside the crater in order to explore the great crater of Paldea, which I do think the world building of Paldea is interesting, because although it doesn't let you inside the crater at all when you just play the game before you even beat the 3 different paths, I just think that they did get creative this time around and created like a paradox. And I thought the paradox, like the Great Crater of Paldea, I do think we do have some, like, interesting places to visit here. Like, some research labs. And there is some new Pokemon that you can't catch in the rest of Paldea in the Great Crater of Paldea. Because if you want to catch a Paradox Pokemon, the Great Crater of Paldea is your stop. Because so far, as of this recording, I've only caught one, and that's Iron Bundle, being the Paradox Pokemon for Delibird. And for the final boss, I just think the plot twist of Professor Turo, in the case of me, because I played Violet, I just think in the plot twist of Turo being like an AI, I just felt like the twist like that didn't really work. Because don't forget, it may have been like predictable at times, but really, I can say for now, although I thought the villain wasn't that great, I do think the twist itself was fine. But the twist was predictable. And just before we get into the summary, there is a few things I do want to point out about the game. I do think the world building of Paldea, I do feel like taking inspiration from Spain and Portugal with a new twist. I thought taking a unique twist on a real life country, I do like the way they took a twist. Like, we don't really have a crater in Spain in real life to my knowledge, but I do think there's still a whole bunch of world building that Paldea has to do. Because don't forget, there is a top right corner in the map. We don't know what that can lead to. Like, that could lead to anything. It could lead to, like, Kalos. It could lead to, like, a new area of Paldea. We'll just have to wait for the DLC to find out. Like, but now, there are a few parts of the game I didn't really like. And that is when you would go to a village or, like, a city in the game, and you, like, enter a restaurant area, and it just pops up with a menu instead of, like, an explorable area you can go to. And, like, you can't freely explore the inside, like in Sword and Shield, which is a bummer. You can for the sandwich shops, though, but the other restaurants you can't. And finally, before we get into the summary, I want to talk about the terrestrializing phenomenon. I thought the terrestrialized phenomenon was alright. It's not my favorite of the 4 phenomenons we've had so far, the previous being Mega Evolutions, Z-Moves, and Dynamaxing. I just think that terrestrializing is alright. I do like the whole type change concept, but the only thing I didn't really like about it was I just think the toppers of each terrestrialized Pokemon were a bit lazy, if you get what I mean. Because Sword and Shield, when you Gigantamax a Pokemon, it actually changes that Pokemon's appearance. I actually like that. But Scarlet and Violet, unfortunately, didn't give some unique appearance-changing phenomenon or anything like that. But really, I just think terrestrializing, if I had to rank all 4 phenomenons from worst to best, Z-Moves would be at my bottom, terrestrializing would be 3rd, Dynamax at 2nd, but Mega Evolutions at the top. And now for the summary. For the gameplay, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. The gameplay wasn't quite there with Legends Arceus, but I can safely say that there is a few interesting mechanics to take this time around. And with it being the first open world Pokemon game, at least we have freedom to do what we want in any order this time around. For the graphics, I'm going to give it a 6.7 out of 10. Unfortunately, the graphics were alright. They were better than the graphics of Legends Arceus, but I just think the only problem is, although I barely encountered any bugs when I played the game, but I just think with the whole low resolution textures within the game, and especially in dock mode where the frame rate feels a bit low, I just feel like Scarlet and Violet is best played in handheld. The story mode, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. Although not a terrible story mode, I do think there is some interesting lore to deep dive into with Paldea. And I do think with terrestrializing, having its own lore, I do think is a bit interesting as well. Although I do feel like the final boss may have been a bit predictable, but really, I just think the game could have had a better story mode. For the characters, I'm going to give a 6 out of 10. Because this game didn't have a terrible roster of characters. There were a whole bunch of characters that did appeal to me. Like, Nimona, Penny, although I did find the whole Cassiopeia twist a bit predictable. Clive, aka Professor Clavel from the Academy. But I can say for now, the only characters out of this game I really hated were the Elite Four and the gym, like the champion. I really dislike the Elite Four and the champion this time around, unfortunately. And yet again, I hated the new art style they went with the characters this time around, because although I do think they should have kept the art style of the characters from Sword and Shield and not make it more cartoony, I just feel like they should have kept a more anime-ish art style, because that feels more Pokemon than being cartoony. Because really, as of the designs of the human characters, I don't want them to make it feel like Balan Wonderworld, aka one of the worst games I've ever played. For a feature that's only available in this review video is we have the new Pokemon. For the new Pokemon, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. The lineup of new Pokemon this time around wasn't terrible. I just think we did have a few disappointing ones in here. Like, we do have Spidops, whose design I wasn't a fan of. The pre-evolution of Grafaiai, I thought did not make sense at all. But the one thing I have to get into is probably the Paradox Pokemon. Because I don't know why they wasted some Pokédex slots with the Paradox Pokemon. I don't know why they just didn't do what they did with the Alolan and Galarian forms by just making them making the Paradox Pokemon the forms of the different Pokemon. So, for example, if Iron Bundle was called Delibird Future Form, that would be fine. And I just think the naming of the Paradox Pokemon I thought was a bit lazy. Apart from the two mascot legendaries, Koraidon and Miraidon. And I was disappointed with the final evolutions of the starters this time around, unfortunately. But Fuecoco does have a decent design. I just wasn't the biggest fan of the other two. For content, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I thought the amount of content to do in the post-game is fine. Like, I haven't really got into the post-game yet, but from what I've heard, it's not really that lackluster at all. Well, it doesn't have as much content to do as Sword and Shield, but I still think that Scarlet and Violet does have a decent amount of content to get through. For the music, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. The music, though, I wasn't the biggest fan of this music. The music in Scarlet and Violet, because I just think, in my opinion, it didn't have the energy that Sword and Shield's music had. Although, the whole crowd cheering thing, I think when you get to the point where a gym leader terrestrializes their Pokemon, you can hear like crowds cheering and stuff. But personally, I just think the music this time around just didn't have the energy that Sword and Shield had. But overall, I do think Ed Sheeran's new song that he did release for this, known as Celestial, I do think that song did get stuck in my head for a bit once I've completed the game, because yet again, the Detective Pikachu movie did end with the song Carry On in the credits, and I feel like this is the first Pokemon game to have an original song slipped into it. And I wonder what original songs we would get within future Pokemon games, which I do hope they do that. Overall, the music wasn't terrible, but the new Ed Sheeran song was probably the best part as of the music. For the online, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. The online, there's not really that much to do within the online, apart from like 6 and 7 star raids. But really, I just think the Union Circle feature just feels a bit slow, in my opinion. And that's, I think, the only part about it I don't really like about the online, is how slow the Union Circle is. But I do think this game does have some alright online functionality. I just don't think the Switch can handle something like the Union Circle. And I just thought it would have been best to wait until the next Nintendo console and the next Pokemon game in order to bring a feature like that. The difficulty, I'm going to give it a moderate, because the DLC, like the game overall, I felt like some parts of it were easy, some parts were difficult, and I just felt like there should have been like a thing like in the Skylanders franchise, for example, where you can pick out your difficulty instead of just having the game be a bit too easy. For the length, for me, really, it took 34 hours to beat the game. But the length is between 31 and 34 hours. Because don't forget, I ended up taking my time with the story mode, because I did go around Paldea for a bit of that time actually catching Pokemon, instead of focusing on the story. So it took me about 34 hours to complete. For the audience, I'm going to give it a 6+. Because there's no, like, detailed violence in this game that should be acknowledged. Unlike my God of War Ragnarok review, which I did release last week, I just think that this game is probably targeted towards children and Pokemon fans. And finally, for the perk was kind of a hard one to choose this time around, only because I feel like this perk is dependent on if you are a big Pokemon fan or not. Because I would give it the collector perk, but don't forget this game does have its flaws that is preventing it from getting the collector perk. But I would give it the collector perk only for die-hard Pokemon fans. But for the perk, I'm going to give it the play then sell perk. But overall, I give Pokémon Scarlet and Violet a 7.4 out of 10. Although Pokémon Scarlet and Violet aren't my dream Pokemon games, or are they perfect by any means, but the open world formula introduced in Scarlet and Violet is a step in the right direction for the Pokemon franchise. And although there were a few themes within the game that I've wanted to see within Pokemon for a long time, I've wanted to see a past and future theme in a Pokemon game for quite a bit, and we finally got that. It's just, I felt like the game did have its flaws. But overall, Scarlet and Violet wasn't terrible. It is, of course, replayable by any means, but I would say it isn't amazing, and it isn't disappointing either. That's all I can say about the game. And I do hope when we do get DLC for Scarlet and Violet that they will end up spicing things up a bit. So guys, what do you think of my Pokemon Scarlet and Violet review? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and turn your notification bell on so you don't miss another video like this one. And I will try my hardest to get my Sonic Frontiers review out for next week. So, I will see you all in a future review video. BB8 out.